Light on, what's exciting in Brighton? And who's doing inspiring things in Manchester and Sheffield? All will be revealed. Light on, a journey of discovery through Bristol, Hull and Coventry. What's cool in Liverpool, you'll see. Scintillating cities and stunning countryside. Strap in and enjoy the ride. Light on, with Hazel as your guide. Lights on, strap in, enjoy the ride. Lights on, with Hazel as your guide. Lights on, strap in, enjoy the ride. Lights on.
Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the Light On podcast series, where I spread the light a little bit further than Leeds. Martin Gaughan is a composer of contemporary classical music. He's currently living in North Devon, but he did live in York for a while. He tells me about the road he took to becoming a composer and the piece he wrote for Opera North. And of course he told me what's great, not so great, and a hidden gem of Taunton, Devon. I really hope you enjoy the interview. So on this episode of Light On, I have Martin Gaughan come to speak to me. Hello, Martin.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's now we've had a few technical hitches, but we've got here in the end.
Yes, thankfully, yes.
So, Martin, can you tell me a little bit about what it is that you do? So we're talking mainly about the fact that you're a composer.
Yes, so it's something I've always wanted to do, and something I started doing when I was a kid. Most people were a bit surprised when I wanted to start doing it, and I grew up in the 80s. I was a kid in the 80s, and I just could never get into the pop music, and I eventually, by chance, discovered classical music. I don't come from a classical music family or anything like that, and of course from Acomb, which obviously you know.
Yeah.
And I think I just sort of fell in love with the classical music, to be honest. And then from there, I think I just wanted to write it. I think I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back now, I think that's what I always wanted to do, even as soon as I discovered it, because I used to play various instruments. But even when I was playing in bands or orchestras, I used to always add bits. I used to always think, arrogance of youth. I used to think that I was adding something better to what was already composed. And I used to do it all the time. And then eventually it sort of dawned on me that maybe I should actually write my own stuff, instead of trying to change other people's stuff. And so that was my first kind of tryout with composing. It wasn't very good, the first couple of things I did.
Well, everything takes practice, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. It does take a lot of practice. Yes, it does. It does.
So once you sort of decided, you heard this music that you really liked, and you decided, yeah, that's what I want to do. Like, how did you find out how to get into that?
I think there's a lot of pestering, a lot of people. My parents just thought I was crazy because they weren't I'm not from a musical family. The school thought I was equally crazy because they had brass bands, because it being York, they had lots of brass bands, and orchestras were not really considered to be, as interesting. But there was one teacher. There's always one teacher, isn't there? There's always one teacher. There's one teacher at school who was very much interested in orchestras and orchestral music, and I think I don't quite know how we found out. I think he sort of found out that I was interested in doing things, and we got talking. And he was the RE teacher, and I said to him, I don't want to play in a concert band, I don't want to play in a jazz band, and I don't want to play in a brass band. I want to play in an orchestra. And he might have set that up for me, which was fantastic. And yeah, that was just brilliant. The first time I got to do that was just fantastic. I used to play trombone in those days, so he was very keen on that. And thinking back, I think he was kind of not anti brass bands and all that, but I think he was much more pro orchestra, and I think he probably saw it that I was as well, and that kind of, we went down that avenue sort of together. Really, he was really, really helpful like that.
Oh, that's great, isn't it? When you have a teacher who can help you along and help you find the way. So
definitely.
Once you started playing trombone in the orchestra, when did you learn about how to compose your own pieces?
Yeah, I mean, I had to teach myself, because we didn't do what would be GCSE music now, supposed to be O level back in my day. I taught myself really by looking at scores, looking at the music itself. That's how I learned. And just playing in the orchestra. I think for anybody who composes, I think either playing or singing in anything is a fantastic learning tool anyway. But yeah, I learned through going to my local library. I was there every Saturday for hours, and I just go through all the York Library, and I just go through all the scores and borrow them, and yeah, I keep them for ages and ages. I just learned that way, just through looking at scores. And the first scores were Beethoven. I used to go crazy on Beethoven, and you just look at just devouring them and seeing what they did.
Wow. Don't you think it's lucky that, you managed to find that teacher? Like you say, you didn't come from that kind of background,
No,
everything around you wasn't geared towards classical music. It's just so lucky, isn't it, that you had that little chance?
it is, yeah, very much so. I remember working. They called Peter Sellers, like the comedian, and I found out later on that he was actually quite involved after I left school. I found out that he was involved in a lot of orchestras. He was on the board of a lot of orchestras, and he was involved in a lot of the classical music in York, and sort of involved with various things there. So he was quite sort of, I think, influential outside the school as well. But yes, it was very lucky. And as I say, I don't quite know how. I suppose it's a teacher's job to kind of know what the students are into, but we sort of picked up on each other, I suppose, and he realised that that's what I liked. Yeah, so I was very lucky, and I often think about him, these days.
Yeah, shout out to him. And so when you left school, when you finished your GCSEs, your levels, did you have a clear pathway of where you could take your education to get where you wanted to be?
No, not at all. I had no idea how you're meant to be a composer. I had no idea. I mean, kind of whenever I went for careers advice, people say to me, "What would you like to do?" And I say, "I want to be a composer." They just laugh, and they say, "What do you want? Kind of, you got anything else like a proper job you want to do?" Which still makes me laugh that you'd say things like that, which is really unhelpful. So no, I didn't. So I went on, I went on a YTS scheme back in the day for a couple of years, and I discovered that Harrogate had a very good proprietary college. They did A level music, but they also did a lot of stuff. It was all music. In fact, you couldn't really do any other A levels because there was so much music. It was all day that you really just had to do the music A level. But it was so much more than that. They spent all day, every day doing something, and there was choirs and all. It was brilliant. So it was like I did 2 years there and had such a great time, and they helped a lot. And obviously, I met other people there, other students there who were my age, who were also very keen. So that was a wonderful thing to do. Yeah, it's still there. It used to be Central Harrogate. It's moved down to Hornbeam Park now, but it's still there in Harrogate.
Yeah, one of the nicest railway station names, Hornbeam Park.
Yes, it is.
That whole line.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And so from there, were they able to sort of help you decide where you would go to study at university? Where would the best place be?
Yeah, they were really good with that because the two teachers, well, three teachers, they were very good with that, and they sort of suggested various things. I mean, because it was Harrogate, they suggested lots of places like the Royal Northern and the Royal Scottish as well. But I just liked the idea of going to London. So I think just to get where just somewhere interesting to go. I just love the idea of going to London. So they suggested Trinity because Trinity College of Music had links with our college, so they suggested that. So that seemed great, and there were some interesting composers there at the time when I was looking to go to college. So I thought I had my heart set on London really, and I did go and audition at Glasgow and things, but yeah, London was really where I wanted to go. So that's where I set my heart. Yeah.
Yeah. And what was it that you actually studied in London?
Composition. So I did composition. I had to do you had to do other things like, so for example, I did electronic music as well as kind of a second study, and then you had to continue with an instrument. So I did trombone as well as third study, but it was good because I actually although I was only a third study trombone, I had a really good trombone teacher, and he worked with so many people. He was and he was a very interesting man. We used to be honest, we'd spend quite a lot of time just talking about new contemporary music.
Mm.
But he was a good person to have lessons with. Yeah.
And how did you find the electronic music side of it? Because you were saying that when you were younger, you weren't particularly interested in sort of modern popular music.
Yeah, sorry, I should have explained that a little bit more. It wasn't popular music. It was contemporary classical electronic music.
Ah, right.
So in the kind of 50s, 60s, there was a whole spate of composers like Boulez, Stockhausen, who got into electronics using synthesizers, using computers. I mean, so did pop musicians, of course, as well. But there was a whole side of contemporary classical music that used those as well and still do. And there's whole sorts of the composers that do formulas for computers, and that helps them write the music. Not something I do. I was very interested. I've got to admit, at first, I was very kind of hesitant to it, but I thought, well, it's an interesting thing to learn about, and I actually quite enjoyed it. And again, I got very well with the teacher there as well. I can't say it's something I've necessarily used a lot, but it
Yeah.
was good. It was good to have done. I'm glad.
Mm.
I'm glad I did it. It sort of broadened my horizons.
Yeah, another string to your bow.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and so once you left university, I mean, how easy is it just to, I mean, do you just say, I'm a composer, and how do you have to sort of create pieces and get them out there? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, again, when I left, I wish I can't. I mean, I wish when I left, I can't remember at Trinity whether they did tell us or I just didn't listen, or I'm sure they didn't really say anything about building career. These days, I think it's completely different. So colleges now, they've got a very completely different view on it about how to build a career. And I think I had no idea. I think I just thought I'd leave college and just write music and people would want it,
Hmm.
which of course wasn't the way. And it took a long time to know who is out there and see people in a similar position who are starting out and contact those people and then make those connections. And I didn't know anything about that at all. I didn't know anything about that whatsoever. And it took a long, long, long time to do it. And I'm still doing it. Actually, I'm still doing that. And there is so much of that. There is so much of that involved as well. But that's the thing that they didn't really teach me, which would have been rather useful to have known. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the thing is that nowadays, I mean, I work for the University of Leeds, and I think that nowadays, students pay such a lot of money for their courses.
Mm,
It kind of, you need to be able to show them what they're going to get out of it at the end, in
yeah,
a way.
absolutely.
And I think that sort of the onus is much more on universities now to do that than
Yeah.
it used to be.
Yeah, I believe so, and I know people who've like done a PhD who are doing PhDs for a couple of people in Scotland, a couple of people at the Royal Academy in London, and there does seem to be a stronger career path of places to go and kind of help and kind of where to work and ensembles to approach and musicians to approach, which can only be a good thing. Which I didn't really get that when I was at college, because it was just different.
So how
Talking.
did you, when you wrote your first, well, I obviously you'd already been writing things, but when you'd done your first composition, did you just make something and then get it out there? How did that work? The
I
first
think
one?
yeah, I mean, I used to get. There's always been. I always say there's brave people out there who are. There's lots of people who are willing to play new music. I mean, there's a whole load of musicians who are at college or come out who love working with composers, and they're always keen to work get new music. And sometimes the harder the better for some musicians. And of course, there's the opposite. There's people who don't like that kind of thing at all.
Mhm.
So there are always people around. It's just finding out who they are. But social media has been really good. I know a lot of people don't like social media, and I get that. But I've got to be honest, and like Facebook and Twitter have both been really, really good. Because if somebody is, let's just say a saxophonist, for example, if they're looking for new music, they will put a post on Twitter and just saying, "I'm looking for new music. Anybody interested?" And they might get lots of replies, but if it's something that looks really interesting, I will message them. And actually, majority of things that I've done have been through that. It's been
Oh,
brilliant.
wow.
And lockdown was good as well because people were looking for stuff in lockdown. It's very inventive. People were looking for stuff in lockdown, and they would do like we're doing here. They'd like have 4 Zooms going on. They wouldn't be able to meet, but they'd get together, do a concert on Zoom in their own homes, all 4 of them, put it together, and I'd have written the music for it.
Wow.
That was really inventive. Some really clever stuff. I just wrote the music. They did all the kind of technical side of it. And there was even a guy in America who had a massive ensemble of about 30 people, and he recorded each track separately with headphones on, like I'm wearing. Each musician did it with headphones on. He put them all together and mixed it and did a concert that way. So it was
Wow.
really inventive over lockdown.
Yeah, yeah,
Amazing.
definitely. When you need that extra connection as well. You'll have to forgive me, Martin, because I'm not clued up on all of this. So forgive me if I ask any dumb questions. But so for example, you were just saying then, a saxophonist could get in touch with you and ask you to write a piece. As a composer, do you have to have like a really good knowledge of every instrument, and like I imagine it's the same notation, but do you have to have a real knowledge of how different instruments will work together? And I
Yeah, you
imagine you
do.
have to have a really broad knowledge.
You do. You have to. Yeah, you do. You have to learn. I mean, that takes a long time, but it's also quite exciting. It's quite a nice way of doing it. I mean, you really need to know as much about their instruments as they do, and actually probably a little bit more because it's always quite. Because you often get into arguments. They'll say, "We can't play that." And you say, well, if you try it, and it kind of go, got to be quite a lot of diplomaticness that has to go on, and it's always been the way. You can read about any of the great composers, and it's kind of, they have these conversations, about, like, for example, Tchaikovsky's first piano concerto, which is really famous. The pianist was all upset and said, "Oh, I can't possibly play this." And that's a classic now, and yes, you do, but also you can work with a musician as well. You can kind of, for example, first time I wrote something for harp, I said to the musician, "Look, yeah, I'd love to write something for the harp, but you're going to have to sit down and just tell me a few things, And she was great, so that was good. So yeah, it's kind of a two-way thing, but as long as most musicians are quite happy to try things out, and they'll give some good advice and that sort of thing. But yeah, you do need to know. You need to know the at least the basics,
Yeah.
but quite a lot of the other things as well. It's a learning process.
Yeah, but I bet that's part of what makes it really interesting.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is, absolutely. Yeah, and the different instruments that work together, some of them sound good and some of them don't. But also listening as well is such an important thing, and studying scores. And what I mean by scores, a score is like the full, all the music that the orchestra are playing at that point in, say, a symphony. If studying those scores is really, really important, because you can learn from all the great composers. That's a really good way of doing it.
Oh, brilliant. And so do you have people come to you and ask you to help you compose something, but then also you compose things for yourself that you enjoy doing?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So it's a bit of both. So you kind of, sometimes people will work with you. I mean, I think, it's nice, but it's very nice when people say, "Oh, would you be interested in writing me something?" That's lovely when that happens, So you got that. And then sometimes it's like a bit of a collaborative thing, again, sort of mentioning things like social media. They might be posting and you sort of get into a conversation, and that works, and that's quite good. And then, but yeah, sometimes it's kind of, you want to just compose something for yourself, even though it may never get performed.
Yeah.
And people find that strange, and I can understand why people find that strange. I do, but there's certain things that you want to write that you just got to write.
Yeah.
And may get performed, it may not, but you want to write it, and the satisfaction you get from doing that is great. It's a really good thing.
Well, I'll make sure I put lots of notes in the podcast notes, because you have a SoundCloud account where you've got lots of songs that you've composed on there.
Yeah.
And is that the kind of that's where is that where you're putting your self-composed pieces for yourself?
Yes. Well, no, that's a combination of things. So it's a combination of, because that's a whole other thing as well. Because when people perform them, they don't always necessarily want to. If they will record it, but sometimes they'll say, "This is only for you to listen to. I don't want it. Don't want it going any further." And you've got to go with their wishes on that. They don't feel the recording is their recording, and they're not talking about the music I've written. They're talking about their own performance. They're saying they feel that their performance isn't strong enough to put out on a social media platform like my website. But most, quite a lot of performers are fine with that. They haven't got a problem with it. But there are a few, that are kind of like, "No, this is definitely, please don't put it out there, because I'm not happy with my own, with the performance of it." So I've got a combination of things that I've written for people. Mainly, it's kind of people who wanted something and they said that they'll record it. But there's I've got a lot of music that's never been performed. So there's a lot of music that's not on the website as well.
And do you ever sort of, where does it change from project to project, where your involvement ends? So for example, you've created the score. Are you ever there for the recording process as a composer?
No, that's a really interesting that is a really interesting question, because it's like, I've discovered that kind of over the years, most generally speaking, the performers don't want you there. They like you to be there for the performance, of course. They like that sort of thing. And they like you there for the last rehearsal. But that's probably about it. Maybe the first rehearsal, when they sit down, they've got lots of questions and want to ask you. But the rehearsals in between, no, they don't want the composer to be there, and they don't like it. Quite a lot of them, in my experience anyway, don't like it if you're hanging around too much. They like you to just get on with it. If they've got questions, they'll email you or just ask you. And so they kind of don't want the composer to be involved too much. It's kind of
and is that because they worry that it's almost like they worry that you're like watching them with a beady eye to make sure that everything is done exactly as you've laid it out?
Yeah, and I think they feel they can't put their own, because musicians like to express things in their own way. And I think they worry about that, kind of they wouldn't. But exactly as you said, they wouldn't want me looking over their shoulder, and I get that. I can understand that. I played. I mean, I still play trombone a bit, and I've played pieces by composers, and yeah, I can understand why they wouldn't want the composer there all the time. Yeah. Absolutely.
And has there been times when you've composed something and the end product is changed as to what you've done it, and have there been occasions when that's been a good thing, and maybe ones where you're like, I wish they hadn't done that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have written pieces where I've given quite a lot of freedom to the performers, which is something I'm quite interested in anyway. I quite like that idea of the performer being able to. I wouldn't want to kind of prescribe 100% what I want. I don't want to say you have to do all of these things 100% as I expected. I like to give the performer a certain amount of leeway. That's quite a nice thing. So I've experimented with that with a couple of players who are interested in doing that as well, which is quite good. But I suppose there's only a certain amount of leeway. But actually, my experience in that has been, just thinking, actually quite positive. Yeah, it's quite. Sometimes it can be quite surprising.
Yeah.
And they will take things and they'll do it their own way. But that makes it quite exciting. I don't think I've ever had a negative experience. I'm sure that will come at some point.
Let's hope
But
not.
yeah, but no, so far it's always been it's been quite interesting. It's interesting to see how a performer reacts to something you've written, because it's never quite what you expect. So they'll always surprise you.
Yeah, because I can imagine it must be quite difficult from either end. Even though you can have a conversation about it, and even though you can look at the scores and things, I imagine there must be elements that the individual is going to put into them that is going to slightly change things. And I think that must be nice, sort of in a collaborative way, as long as
Yeah.
you're not too sort of precious about, I don't want anything changed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is important because for example, if you kind of take a recording of say the Beethoven Violin Concerto, which is a really famous piece, and all the great violinists throughout history have played it, they all play it slightly differently. Even though Beethoven wrote all the notes down, he wrote the tempo markings down, he wrote the dynamics down, but they all play it slightly differently. And really, violinists can generally tell which violinist is playing it, as well. But they all play it. They all play it slightly differently, and I that's one thing I love about music. Anyway, it's kind of, I know that if I write a piece, say a piano piece, if I give it to one pianist, the next pianist is going to play it slightly different because they're going to put their own personality in it. I think that's a wonderful thing. That's
Yeah, I
quite
bet that's
exciting.
really interesting to see.
It is. It is. Yeah.
And so you were telling me a little bit about that you wrote an opera about Medusa.
Yeah, so there's something I'm working on at the moment. Yeah, so something we just started doing. So I've been looking for something. The hard thing about doing opera is that you working with somebody else. Now you can do your own libretto, which is what we call the words, but the book you can. But the composers who tend to have done that are composers like Wagner, and yeah, his operas last for about 5 hours, and I think it's probably better. Most 90%, 99% of composers, I'd say, even tend to work with a librettist, and I think there's probably very good reasons for that. But it's very hard to meet a librettist because you got to kind of gel. You've got to find a subject that you both like, but then even when you find a subject you both like, you've got to kind of be on the same kind of creative wavelength with it as well, because that you can get a libretto through and think, I can't do that. And there's nothing wrong. It's a bad libretto. It just doesn't work for your style of music, And but I've liked the idea of Medusa for ages. And so the person I got talking to, I just put, again, it was just a social media thing. I just said, would anybody? It's a librettist page, especially for people who wrote like librettos. And somebody contacted me and said, yeah, I'd be quite interested in that. And we didn't just want to do the original myth. We wanted to kind of, look at it from different angles. But the nice thing was we were on the same page. It wasn't. We didn't see Medusa as a hideous creature. Kind of. She was a kind of a much more nuanced and much more interesting character like that. In fact, she was raped and then she was kind of turned into this monster by her protector. So she was very badly done by, and we wanted to portray that as well. And the kind of the hero, as it were, Perseus, we definitely didn't want him to be a hero. He had to be in it, but we wanted him much more as a kind of reflective character and sort of tormented by what he did. But we both almost had the same ideas, which was brilliant. But there's no way I could have written those words. I wouldn't be able to do that. I wouldn't be able to do that. But the librettist I worked with did brilliantly, and she finished it about 2 weeks ago. And
Wow.
it's very good. She's very talented. Yeah.
So what's the next stage then?
next stage is to to start writing the music for it. So we planned it all out, and I talked, we talked about the different characters and what voice types they should have, because that's an interesting discussion, because it's kind of so Medusa, which should be high voice, low voice. We decided she should be medium high voice. So working out the characters, what voice is. It's in 3 acts, so 3 big chunks. Roughly how long it is, where the dramatic parts come, so planning those things, what kind of sound is each character going to have, and then kind of what's the orchestra going to be? Is it going to be a big orchestra, small orchestra, etc.? And then thinking about, well, where the climax is going to come, and then how is it going to start and finish? Because that's always really important. And I think I've read writers talk about the same thing at the beginning or the end. So yeah, it's been good. I've just started writing it. I've just started composing the opening now.
Oh, fantastic. That is really exciting. And then so once you've got all of that in place, which sounds like, a lot of work, but fun. Once you've got all that in place, are you going to produce it yourself, or do you then take the idea to an opera house? I don't know how that works.
There's a couple of smaller opera places. There's a couple in London mainly who are interested in such things, and it's kind of so that's quite good. And there are people. What tends to happen is that it tends to be like they do scenes, so that they wouldn't necessarily do the whole thing. They do a part of it, or do some scenes from it, and then maybe build up from there. So it often seems to be the case that when people writing operas do a little bit of it, they perform a little bit of it, see what the composer thinks, see what the performers think, and it builds up from there. It's that kind of idea. But there are some contemporary opera companies around which are really good, and I'm really grateful for such things. And they are very approachable, and they're great actually. And of course, again, there are singers and performers out there who are very much interested in. They don't necessarily want to do Mozart and Puccini. They're very interested in doing new music, which is also very lucky.
Yeah, absolutely.
But obviously, it's a harder thing. Writing a piece for violin and piano is one thing. It's not always easy to get that on. But of course, in opera, you asked about producing it. No, I wouldn't. I've got ideas that would be down to a producer to do.
Right.
I certainly wouldn't want to get involved in. I'd have my thoughts on the matter, but the producer would do what a producer would do, and the lighting and everybody else. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, all right. I see. And did you say that you've done a piece for Opera North in the past?
Yeah, there was an interesting thing. There was an interesting thing a couple of years ago when they were just looking for pieces about Opera North. Opera North wanted a whole selection of thing about pieces about them, which was just really too good to not have to do. So again, I worked with a librettist who quite liked this idea as well. So Opera North wanted pieces about their foundation when they started. I forget when that was, but when they started as an opera company. So we did this little thing where we had some singers, and I put in quotes of all the operas they worked on when they started as an opera company. So they did performances of things like Samson and Delilah and Offenbach, Orpheus in the Underworld. So there's little references to those pieces, but it's a kind of a little comic thing as well, because the singers are all discussing things, and there's a director. And it was really, I was just too nice. It was just too nice an idea not to do. And that came out of the blue. That wasn't something I've been thinking about for ages and ages. Just somebody said to me, I said, yeah, that just sounds fantastic. And I really enjoyed doing that. Yeah. It's only short. It's about 20 minutes, but that was a really good thing to do. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, brilliant. And so you made reference to the fact that you used to live in Acomb, where I've also lived. And then you went to London to go to university. So how did you ended up in North Taunton in Devon?
Well, kind of, I was in London for most of my life, and loved living in London. I loved it. 2 things happening within about 24 hours. Where I was living, my landlady she said she was selling the place, and she was really apologetic because I'd been living there. So anyway, she did. That's what she did. And then the same, I think 2 hours or 3 hours later, work rang up and said, "We're really sorry, we've lost the funding. I do a little bit of work as a support worker for children and families, that sort of thing." And they said, "We're really sorry, we've lost the funding." And it was like,
all in one day.
Yeah, in the space of about 4 hours. And I thought, okay. But I've got a good friend down here who helped set us up today, and who's an opera singer, and she said, "Why don't you come down here for a little bit, because I could do with somebody to look after the house and the cats." And I said, "Yeah, okay." And 10 years later, I'm still here.
Oh, wow. So you must really like it there.
Yeah, it was a big change because obviously London, York,
Yeah.
here it's very. I'm lucky if I see more than 2 or 3 people in a week. Sometimes it's
Really?
very quiet. It took me a long time to get used to that, but I have now,
Good.
and it's completely the opposite of what I had before. But I've grown to love it. Yeah,
Oh,
I
good. I'm
really.
really glad to hear that.
Yeah,
So what would you say is something that's great about living in North Taunton, Devon?
I think one of the best things is I think one of the best things is the GP actually, because when I was in London, it was like queues for hours to get to see a GP, but here, because it's such a small community, it's you make an appointment and you get seen. If you're 2 minutes late, maybe, but that's it. You know, and it's just peaceful. It's just so nice and quiet. And I love that.
Yeah, total opposite to living in London.
Yeah.
And if you had to say something that wasn't so great, what would you go for?
Transport isn't brilliant. I don't drive,
Right.
and so the buses are every 2 hours. Now they're good
Every two
if you
hours.
every 2 hours, and the last bus is about 5:15 in the evening, and
Wow.
and
So
there's
there's
no
no
buses
going out for nights out.
no going out for nights out, and there's no buses on a Sunday or bank holidays. So
Wow.
completely different to London. But if you time them right, it's good. But that's one thing that's quite tricky.
Well, it'll make a big difference for everyone listening to this podcast because usually it's like everybody says for number two, but it's about transporting Leeds and how bad it is. So now everyone can listen to this and think, well, maybe it's not so bad. And if you could tell people about something you would consider to be a hidden gem in the area where you live that you think other people should come and visit, what would you go for?
Well, I think that I'm discovering there's actually quite a lot. I mean, one of the things we've got the national parks quite close by. We've got Dartmoor and Exmoor close by, which are just beautiful. I mean, they really are beautiful. We've got there's loads just where I live. There's loads of little hidden places. I just discovered a couple of years ago that Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes lived very close by. Apparently Noel Edmonds. I'm not sure. Noel Edmonds used to live quite close by as
No, not quite on the same league there.
no, not quite the same league, but there's so there's lots of little things like that which are quite really interesting, and there's a nice little community here as well. It's kind of there's always people doing talks and that sort of thing about the area as well, which is very nice. And actually, the funny thing is, there's quite a lot of like choirs and little ensembles. I've sang in more choirs here since being here than I ever did in London.
Wow, really?
Yeah, yeah, because there's so many of them, and they find out I just like doing a little bit of singing in the choir. I'm not, a professional singer or anything like that. I just like to sing sometimes. And if they find out you like to sing and you're a man, that's it. They'll have you in the choir.
Oh, that's absolutely brilliant. Um, so I always ask guests if they'd like to feature a track, and we are featuring a track of yours called Echoes. That's part of a larger piece called The Pale Goddess. What should people know about this track?
um, I wrote it about somebody, and I remember they were just really pale and blonde, and I just thought they were an interesting. I just thought they were a really interesting person, and so I thought, yeah. And when I was writing it, I knew them at that point, and so I wanted to write. But the piece that particular movement, I wanted to have a feel of. I want you to feel very kind of calm and chilled and relaxed, and no, not really. It is rhythmical, but I also want it to have just a very relaxing kind of quality about it, almost like feel like there's no beat in it whatsoever. That kind of idea.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it is really beautiful, and
Thank
people
you.
will be able to have a listen. What were you going to do with the rest of your evening tonight, Martin? What will you be doing?
Well, I've got an interesting piece that I'm supposed to be writing, and I just realized I was earlier on today realized that it's nearly September. So there's I can't pronounce it properly, so I apologize. There's a Chinese instrument, I say the guzheng, but it's spelled Guzheng, but I'm pronouncing it wrong, I know. And a guzheng player approached me and asked me if I'd be interested in writing a piece, which I
Wow.
am very much so. So I'm doing that, and I've realised that they're back at college or back at university in September, and that I need to start making a bit of a get on with it.
Yeah, the week after next.
Yeah, and they're in Liverpool, which is quite interesting. I've been up to meet them a couple of times. It's Liverpool. Yeah, I really like. I've
Yeah,
not been
me
to
too. My
Liverpool
son
before.
lives there. I love it.
It's a really cool city. Yeah, I
Yeah,
love
it
it up
really
there.
is.
Yeah. So that's what
Oh,
I'll be doing.
fantastic.
Yeah, because I need to catch up with that.
Well, thank you so very much for speaking to me, Martin. It's been
Pleasure.
really
Pleasure.
illuminating.
Thank you.
I found it fascinating chatting to Martin, and I hope you enjoyed listening. Martin chose to feature a track that he composed called Echoes. It really is very beautiful, and it's part of a larger piece called Pale Goddess. As usual, there are lots of links in the podcast notes so that you can go and explore Martin's work for yourself. Look after yourselves, and I will speak to you soon. Bye bye.